I could, oh, the recording started. You could, I mean, you could call me Dr. Romulus, but I honestly prefer just like my first name, like just Darwin. Like that's what grew up people call me. So that's what I'm most comfortable with. But whatever floats your boat. Um, I am a Xbox user researcher at Microsoft. I also hold a PhD and I have a background in psychology and cognitive neuroscience research. So today I'm just going to talk about my career path, what I've done, and what led me to this point, and why I became interested in making the transition from the academic world into the industry world. And again, feel free to stop me with any questions, anything that you guys want to say. This is very open format um, presentation. Okay, so I will continue with slides. I'm also trying to see you guys while I give the talk as well. So, okay, good. I can just advance this way. Okay, great. Can everybody see my slides? No, right? Because I didn't share my screen. So I gotta do that now. All right, let's go ahead and do that. Um, Click share screen. Oh, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So if we could get that sorted, I can share my slides.
Yeah, I can do that. One second, I'll put you as co-host. Can you check if you can do it now?
Yeah, let me go ahead and check. Let's see that. Share screen. Oh, there you go. There you go. There you go. Second. Yes. How's that look? Good. All right. Great. 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 All right. So, um, introduction. My career as a researcher. So, I started as an undergraduate at Brooklyn College. So I'm from New York City, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. So naturally, because my parents didn't want me to go away for college, they wanted to keep me close. So I ended up going to college right across the street from my high school. Not sure how the education system is set up in Brazil, if there is a high school, if you guys have the same kind of education system, but I would say high school is anywhere between age 13 up until like 17, 18. So ended up going to the university right across the street from my high school. Fun, right? But I actually had a lot of good memories there and a great time at that university. And it's basically where I found out that I was really interested in psychology. I've always was interested in learning more about people and why we do the things we do and why we think the way that we think. Um, but it wasn't until I started taking some psychology courses, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. I want to learn more about this. Um, so um, so I began doing that. And as I started taking more psychology courses, I started to notice that there was a branch of psychology, mainly like cognitive, psychology, neuroscience, that side, that, you could use technology to understand the brain more. And I was like, whoa, like I never knew this before. And I became very interested in that and learning more about the brain. Because the brain is a central part of like when we're studying phenomena of like why we do things the way that we do things, the brain is a central part of that. One of the main components, right? So, um, and with this, I became more interested in research too, and I'll talk about that later, sort of like my research path. But yeah, so after that, after basically doing a couple of rotations in labs in the summer, summer research programs. I did one at UW Madison, which is University of Wisconsin Madison. So I traveled to Wisconsin one summer. That was like summer of 2015. And then the year before that, I was at University of Cincinnati, both doing like pretty much studying complex systems in psychology. Um, One was like more suited in like space perception and learning about space perception and using virtual reality as a tool to understand that more. And then the second thing was more about vision science and learning more about our vision and like using virtual reality to learn about our central and peripheral vision and how we basically perceive the depth of things that are moving towards us. Like, how is our brain able to detect, like, oh, this thing is this close from me from a depth plane? So that was cool. Then I came back to my university after those two things, and um, I was sold on going to graduate school. So after my last year of undergrad, I went and decided to apply to a neuroscience program, complex systems and brain sciences at Florida Atlantic University. So I moved all the way from Brooklyn to Boca Raton, Florida, South Florida, and that was around 2016. So from 2016 to 2021, I stayed in Florida and I studied again, I studied vision, but in particular motion perception and also eye movement patterns. And my dissertation was on looking at these small miniature eye movements we make during fixation. They're called saccades, and their relevance in how we're able to perceive motion of things in our environment. So it was cool. Got to do some eye tracking and also some machine learning as well. Then after all of that, I decided to make the jump from academia into industry. I started working at Microsoft. And I've always been curious, and in addition to the brain and people, I've always been interested in this technology part. Like, how are things built for us, right? We all use computers, we use so many things in our day-to-day lives. Like, who's making the decisions when it comes to making these things, and how are they tuned in a way for us to think that they work, properly, right? We see really good examples of this, like when you're using something and it's like so intuitive. And then we see really bad examples of like, people getting into car accidents and things of that sort because like the systems that are um, designing these things are just there wasn't enough research done, or there were some research flaws in terms of like the human factor, right? And what we're able to do um, with when we're using that product or thing. So yeah, that's how I landed at Microsoft. And then I've always had an interest in video games. I've been playing video games since I was four. And so there was an opening on the Xbox team. And did a couple of interviews and landed my first big boy job after graduate school. So that's like kind of that's my path. And here, this slide, I was just kind of gonna go into a little bit more of some of these things that I did while I was undergrad and graduate school and stuff. Um, so what really helped me kind of get a sense of like research skills, but also just like getting experience and working in a lab was these summer research programs. Um, so I did, I mentioned I did one at UW Madison, University of Cincinnati. So there's plenty of these, and I'm not sure if any of you guys have participated in these sorts of programs yet, but I would highly encourage like if you are interested in doing research, like find a lab in your university to work at, or find one of these summer research programs where they will fly you out, they will pay for your lodging, and they will pay you a stipend on top of that to do research. Um, it was funny because I actually met a lot of Brazilians that year that I went to Wisconsin. There was a lot of students from Brazil that studied abroad, and it was super fun. I got to hang out with them. So, um, but yeah, this is sort of my career path: finding a lab at my school plus these research opportunities, then, preparing for grad school, GREs, and writing personal statements, applying to schools, all that stuff. And then while in graduate school, trying to figure out like what I wanted to do. Did I want to stay in academia, go into industry, um, and then finding like the opportunities that led to the working at Microsoft, which I could talk about a little bit later, and like what I did specifically for that. Any questions so far? Anything that we want to talk about? No, great. I tend to
Sorry, actually, I do have
yeah,
a question.
great.
So these, well, actually, first off, good evening, Dr. Ramos.
Yeah,
Uh,
thanks.
my name is
How are
Victor. Uh, so I'd just like to kind of, take a jab at these summer research programs. So, like, do they allow for international students as well, or is it directed towards domestic students?
Yeah, yeah. So some of them are international, some of them are domestic. I think pretty much you just have to apply and see, or sometimes you have to go and get, excuse me, sometimes you have to go and get those details from the websites itself.
Okay.
So they'll usually tell you. But I've had a lot of instances where I've met students from other universities that
Right.
are not in the United States. So there should be opportunities for international students as well. I can even imagine some programs like preferring to, get international students,
Okay.
um, because like the whole point is to diversify, right? They don't want to just get people from their university or across the U.S. Sometimes they want to do a little bit of a further outreach.
And do you
Um,
think that these opportunities are scattered across all these different websites from the respective universities, or is there like a platform that maybe can facilitate this
yeah,
finding
so
out process?
so that I have to look into more now, like because I back then it was such a long time ago when I you participated in these. Well,
Okay,
I'm pretty sure. I mean, I'm pretty sure now if I were to type in like summer research experience undergrad programs, you could find some on Google. Like that was one way that I just found. Like I just typed in and I found some on Google. But
okay.
now with like LinkedIn and all these things, sometimes they even have groups for these sorts of opportunities. And I'm actually still connected with some of these folks. So I can probably write to them and just say, hey, like like this is a great summer research program. Do you have a repository of like all the other ones in the United States or different universities? Yeah, that information shouldn't be too hard to find.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
mhm, no problem. Any other questions before I move on? Okay, cool. So, for these next couple slides, it looks like I have like some information on like what user experience the discipline is, as since I am a UX researcher, wanting to like, I thought it would be a good idea to kind of give an idea of what I do on a day-to-day basis and like what kind of skills you would need. Because we're talking about because this is a careers talk and I'm talking to you guys as undergraduates, it might be good to like understand what sort of skills you would need to build in order to do something like this if you wanted to, right? Um, so yeah, so you generally UX encompasses like things that have to do with end user interactions. The way that you can basically think about it is if you have a product and that you interact with like a computer or applications right on a computer or a phone, a lot of things. It applies to a lot of things that we use, but it's basically trying to understand that experience that people have, and then trying to figure out how to make those experiences better, using like research and science, right? And particularly methods that are rooted in psychology, right? Um, so why is it important? Um, when it comes to companies, when they're building products, they're trying to basically fulfill user needs, or they try as best. Some companies do a better job than others, but that's the goal, because if you can fulfill the user's needs, then they will come back, they'll buy more. They will you will build like basically a brand trust, right? They'll trust in the company, and they'll keep buying, right? Um, Creating positive experiences for users, um, and also defining customer journeys. Customer journeys are just like the path that someone takes as a customer to like either buy something or when they're using it, right? Like maybe when you first buy something and open it up, all the way towards like a couple of years or even like a few months of using something. That could be like a customer journey that's mapped out. And so basically with UX, if you can understand the needs that users have, you can build trust with them. If you can understand the things that they're having problems with, you can also attempt to fix those problems, especially early on, because when it comes to business, the later you try to fix something in development, when you're developing something, the more it costs, because you're usually having to work on a shorter timeline. You usually have to hire more people, you have to spend more money. Um, and so with UX, it's basically you're building empathy because you're listening to the people that are using your product. You're figuring out what works well for them and what doesn't. And then you're saving money if you implement it early. Um, and those are all three, especially the money thing, right? That's the thing that companies should be most interested in, because when it comes to business, companies are always trying to figure out, how do I make this thing, but how do I spend like the least amount of money, so we can like you know always stay in a net profit, or like always profiting, right? Instead of losing money. Let's see what else I have here. So with UX, there are different careers that you can take. So we have researchers, which is what I am. We have designers, UX writers, UX strategists. I'm mainly gonna touch on like UX research today, because like that's basically what I do, and I think that's again like kind of really rooted into um the discipline for when we talk about psychology. But these are some other things that you can do as well. Um and if we have time, I can shed light on like what each of those things are. Uh let's see here. So with UX researchers, we do conduct research with real users. We conduct research with people um, that are using products, right? And in my case, um, since I work at an Xbox, I'm conducting research with gamers, people who play games and all that stuff, right? Um, it's interesting because if you were to compare this to academia, right? Like it's the same thing with like researching students or people. Um, we're there's we're researching to figure out to answer some sort of question, right? About um, humans, or the way that we think in our brain. It's the same thing here, but the objective is a little bit different. It's understanding users and trying to figure out what's working well and what's not working well, or what people really care about and what they don't care about, so that we can design better for them. Um, we gather data on users. Um, Sometimes we do that by understanding their attitudes. So we might run something like a survey to understand like how people feel about certain things. And sometimes we run more qualitative styles of research, which is like basically like not dealing with numbers there per se, but more so like interviewing, talking to people, having people like walk through like, hey, like how would you play this first level of a game, right? And then observing like what they do, and then kind of figuring out like, okay, what's not working well. Oh, they need a tutorial and they haven't, nothing in the game is teaching them what they need to do, so they're confused, right? So those sorts of things that we would do using like more qualitative methods. Um, so, all of these things align with how we would do research, scoping out suitable participants for our studies. So, when you're running a research study, you want to make sure that you have the right sample and you're studying like you're gathering data from the right folks in order to say something about the population. Um, so we do the same thing here, right? If we have people if we're interested in like learning about people who play racing games, we're gonna try to recruit people who play racing games, not like fighting games or role playing games or something else, right? Um, so yeah, it's basically just understanding how users behave when interacting with products, what their attitudes are when it comes to products. And this is what I do on a day-to-day basis. I can pause here for any questions. Do we have any questions at all? Okay. And I kind of want to
Actually, I do have another question.
sure, no worries, no worries. Go ahead.
I'm a member of the startup league here at Pukihiro, and naturally, we have a pretty in-depth primary research methodology that we aim to teach to fellow associates. And one of the main difficulties that we face early on is the recruitment process for potential customers and clients. And so, do you have any tips maybe on how to run an effective and efficient recruitment process so that you're taking info of the correct people and not getting like fuzzy data from non-target segments?
Yeah. So do you have like something like a screener? So usually with something like a screener, like a screener document is essentially like something that someone would fill out before they do a study. And so you would basically ask some important questions that will kind of allow you to drill down like, hey, okay, we think this person is a right fit for the study, or we don't think this person is a right fit, so we're not going to include them in our study. I don't know what you're exactly trying to do in your study, right? Or what kind of we probably would have to talk offline about that, but I think that's the thing that usually when we do set up experiments and studies that we do with Xbox, there's a whole process. We do like um we do have I'm trying not to like drill in too much, right? Because it's being recorded. But yeah, we do have a process where we do vet potential um participants and we ask them a list of questions, and that would dictate whether or not they were included in our study or not. Is that helpful or
It is. My question though is more geared towards how to actually get people to go through the recruitment process, because I feel like it's a bit of a hassle for people to actually respond to these exploratory analyses and questionnaires. And so, if you have any tips maybe on how to make the process as attractive and seamless for the potential client, just maybe quick insights. We don't need to go too much in depth.
Mhm.
I don't want to take everyone's time by asking questions. So, if you think it's adequate for this moment, then I'd be happy to hear.
Yeah, sure. So you're basically asking how do we get people and more efficiently, right, to participate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, part of I think something that probably serves us is like we have the brand of Xbox, so like people are really excited, especially gamers, right, to participate in our study because of that. But we also, you can imagine a situation where sometimes for these types of studies. I'm talking about any company, not just, you know, Xbox. Um, I have heard of like folks getting paid, right? And getting some sort of incentive to participate. And so if you can think of ways to incentivize respondents, that could help. You know, that I feel like unfortunately, like I know that that sounds bad, but it's like it's something that I even had to do in undergrad when I was doing my thesis. Like we gave gift cards, Starbucks gift cards to people who participated in our studies, and it was like $5 so they could go get like a coffee or, you know, a drink or something like that. So that's something that you might look into, but I don't know if you would, if you have the funding for that.
Okay, no, but thanks for the answer anyways.
Yeah. More questions. I guess I see some hands up. Go ahead.
Hello, hello. I had a question about, are there any conflicts between your research methodology that you learned in college in a more academic environment and the methodology you use at Microsoft? Do you feel like there's different needs for market and academic environments?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So like pretty much like when you're working in the academic world, you know, usually you have more time, you know, unless like you are, I mean, even as a graduate student, right? Like, of course, you want to do things timely in order to graduate on time. But you usually have, you know, more time to plan out what you're going to do, analysis, all of those sorts of things, right? So, like, even if you needed to learn how to do a particular analysis or like study methodology, right, in order to apply it to the thing that you're trying to do as a grad student or even as an undergrad student. Um, Usually there's like more time that you could spend, right? In the industry the industry world, things are constantly moving because of business and you know, timelines, right? So it's not uncommon in the academic world for a project to take 3 to 6 months, like even longer, right? To like finish, right? The whole life cycle. In the industry world, it's more like 3 to 4 weeks, you know, maybe 6 weeks. It depends on like the kind of study that you're doing. Like if there is if there's a need to do like a longitudinal study, then sure, like we will do it. But it's usually things happen on a more shorter cadence. So we're and because of that, like sometimes it feels like you have to cut corners a little bit. Um, or like you may not get the ideal sample size that you wanted for a survey, but you get close to that number and you kind of have to like, okay, well, like, you know, if we were to, you know, you kind of just have to guesstimate like based off of that data, right? And just give that team that information like, hey, like we didn't reach sample size, but like based off of this data we would infer, you know, X, Y, and Z, right? And we just give the best guidelines for that. Yeah. Something like qualitative methods where like if you were trying to score or code like some video data or something like that, you might have more time to do that in an academic setting. In the industry world, you don't. So like you can imagine like if you ran some sort of like, you know, interview or something, and maybe there was some like really good like nuggets if you would have just had longer like to analyze the data. But because you have to analyze it more quickly, there is a chance of you like missing that stuff. But yeah, I think it's because of the faster cadence, like basically having to like um not do as much as you would do in the academic world. And I feel like you have to be okay with that. If you're transitioning from academia to industry, you have to be okay with like not everything is going to get done your way, especially if there's processes already set and built in. Does that answer your question, Lucas?
Yes, and but also as a quick follow-up, do you think the industry is more risk adverse and conservative than the academic field?
Um, hmm. Risk adverse and conservative in terms of like conservative with uh
With research topics and research funding and how much they are interested in investing in
ah
more vanguard ideas.
I mean it just depends. It depends like so like if there's so I'll tell you like I mean for if a company is very interested in some sort of new wave or new topic, right? Like let's say AI, right? Like they're gonna spend money on that, especially if the competitors are doing the same thing, right? So in that case, like it's not conservative because they'll spend whatever they have to spend. But in some cases, there you know there are those sorts of practices applied because at the end of the day, like when we have to do research, when we have to do certain things, like that does cost money. Like we have to like we are allocated funds to do those sorts of things. To get the time in our labs and all that stuff. So um yeah, so in that case, like sometimes we'll have situations where we can only run an X amount of a type of study because like that study is expensive to run because we have to get like people to come in, we have to pay those people. Oftentimes we have to overbook to account for people like saying, "Hey, I'm not gonna show up last minute," right? Oftentimes we have to pay those folks that we've overbooked. So it's one of those things where depending on the situation, things like from a financial perspective, it can be conservative, but sometimes it's not, right? So is that helpful at all? Or
Yes, it's very helpful. Thank you very much.
cool, cool. Joanna?
Hi, quick question. I'm having a hard time placing the UX research in a timeline of building a product. So when you gather these participants, you show them the already done product or maybe just a mock-up or the
Uh,
idea in general?
yeah. So that's one thing that I forgot to mention, right? But good UX practice is you start from the very beginning, right? Or you try to get into the development cycle as early as possible. So like I have done research on mock-up of things, right? Where maybe it's some sort of screen flow, or let's say we want to talk about a phone, right? Let's say we were doing research on a phone. A team could come to me and they could say, "Hey, like we have this design of a phone. We're thinking about putting the buttons here. This is the size of the screen. This is how people would hold the phone, and all the stuff." I can do research on that, right? I could take that design, get some users, and I can give them scenarios like, hey, like if you were to like, you know, hold this phone in this orientation, and if you had to like text or do something, right? Like how would you do that? And I can get data on that. So I can get data on like design documents, all the way from like that's actually really good for like menus. So like when we build menus in games, like we'll use like the design. Sometimes we just get those designs and we'll say, hey, like so this button over here, just like uh, what would you expect to see if you clicked this option, right? And it could be like a settings menu or something. And they would say, oh, I expect, to have some settings for this, this, and this, but not this. And we'll try to like delve in deeper, give that data back to the team and say, hey, like, okay, based off of how you labeled the menu, or like, hey, you put this information under this particular button. but like people aren't expecting to get that information there. They're expecting it to get it from somewhere else or whatever, right? Um, so it's usually as early as possible. And this goes back to like the, when you do implement UX research as early as possible, you save a lot more money because like let's say an instance where someone doesn't or a team decides not to do that, and then they release the product, and they're like, and then there's a lot of reviews or people are like, oh, like I have this iPhone, but like, like I don't even know how to like access like my iCloud settings or whatever, right? And it's like, oh, well, if you would have done the research on that before, you would have found that was a pain point in development, and you wouldn't have to now do the research to figure that out now and do an update and hire people and all that stuff. So it's yeah. So yes, as early as possible. Cool. Do we have any other questions?
We have a question from Enzo in the chat that says, could you tell us more about your admission process to Microsoft?
Right. Okay, cool. I'm glad I'm getting these questions because some of this is not in the presentation, which makes it like, okay, I got to think of, a little bit in depth next time. But these are good questions. So just want to appreciate you guys for the questions. Oh, okay. So for interviewing, so basically what happened with that, I'm just going to start from the very beginning, actually. So before you even interview, before you even get an interview, what I like to do is I like to try to meet people on the team first and just try to get a sense of like how is it like to work on the team, right? And like what sort of work do you do? How long have you worked at this team or this company, that sort of stuff, and I start to do research on like what sort of benefits does the company offer, right? Do they have a good pension? Do they have good, healthcare, that sort of stuff? Are people basically happy at that company, right? So all of that stuff happens. And then you could meet some people in passing that work on a particular team that you would like to work on. And that's always good because when a job opportunity comes up, you can ask for a referral. And that's actually really good to do because for companies like Google, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, oh, Meta now, right? There's so many people applying like all the time. So you got to find a way to like basically diversify yourself, or even like getting a referral or knowing a recruiter is good, right? So after all of that, let's say you get the interview. Sometimes what happens, it's actually quite common actually for UX, you'll get like some sort of exercise. So they might, what I got was basically a worksheet of examples, like research examples, basically of like, hey, like, here's a scenario of like, you're trying to solve um this particular question, right? Like a company or a design team, they want to make a certain product, but they're making these assumptions about their users for this product, and they're saying, hey, like, yeah, we're gonna like, I don't know, like build a popcorn machine in a car because we think people would like that, right? I'm just making a stupid example here. And so then what would you do to like try to figure out like if that's true or not? Like, how do you validate whether or not that's like something people actually want, right? And then you would kind of write up like, oh, maybe I would do a survey, or I would try to like, you know, like see like the people who bought this car in the past, right? Like what are their attitudes on like popcorn, right? And machines and stuff and extra things in their car, right? And if they would want that or not. So basically it's just an exercise to get you to get you thinking. And they really want to see like how do you think about products and experiences from a research perspective. Like, can you map out a research plan, right? It's not really about being right or wrong. It's more so like it, your thought process of running a study. Is it like is it aligned with like with a research analytical perspective, right? So if that happens, then then basically if you do that exercise well, they might call you back for an interview, right? So they call you back for an interview. And then essentially it's the same thing. It's basically like, like they're gonna give you scenarios on the fly now verbally, and then you have to kind of think, um, you know, within like maybe a 45 hour, time span of getting these like sort of scenarios, you would have to like talk about like how would you execute a research plan for this particular scenario that they give you. And then they might ask you about like, hey, like what did you do in school? Or like why are you interested in working at this company? Why do you want to be like a UX researcher or something like that, right? So my experience with those sorts of interviews, it's like partly it's like, making sure that the answers you give are like sound from like a research design perspective, but it's also kind of like just connecting with that person, and like you're already trying to like show that like, hey, like I speak the same language that you speak. Like I'm also interested in whatever thing that you're studying. So like for instance, like if I were to like try to get a job at Spotify, right? Like I might still have to show that research, muscle, but also like I like music, right? Like I use Spotify, and I might try to like show myself as like I'm a fan of your product. So there's a social aspect as well. And then after that, if you pass that, then there's usually either like it's basically like a presentation. You would give a talk. Um, Sometimes it's like giving a talk on like your work as your any research topic. So maybe it's like a research study that you've done in the past, whether it's academic or industry wise. Sometimes I've seen examples where um, they give you a scenario of like, hey, like we want you to go and do this study, or like go and collect some data on this, and then like present to us like the study, and give a whole talk on like what you did. And so usually that happens, and then after that it's usually a day of interviews. So you start with the talk, and then after the talk you meet with individual members who ask you more questions. They give you more scenarios, and then after that you wrap up, and they get back to you. Usually it could take a week or two. It could take longer than that. There's usually a lot more candidates, so they'll kind of go through like, hey, who's the top person that we want, and then if the top person declines, then it's the next person after that, the next person, next person, next person. Um, I know that was long winded. Is there any questions? Any questions about that? No. Okay. Um, we have 10 more minutes. I'm trying to see how what I could use the rest of the 10 minutes for. Um, I was thinking maybe talking about um some of the strategies that I've used to get jobs, or to get interviews. Would that be something that's like helpful? Yeah. So one thing I will say, LinkedIn. I don't know if I have any slides on LinkedIn. Let me see. Um, Let me see. No, I do not. Okay. But LinkedIn is a good tool to use. So just to give some context, when I started looking for a job, um, I was probably in like my fourth year of my PhD, fourth, third, fourth, and that so the year before I graduated my PhD, we had something called COVID-19, right? That happened to the world. We had the pandemic, right? And so it was really awkward because it was imagine going to school, and then I think I was on spring break. Yeah, I was on spring break, and then like never returning to school after that. Well, at least we came back virtually for some time. But basically, when that happened, a lot of people were working from home, and so I just started connecting with a lot of people on LinkedIn, and looking for people in particular that had UX research jobs. So I would say for any job that you want to get or any job you're interested in, it doesn't have to be UX research. It could be software engineering, it could be whatever, right? Um, I would try to first like try to connect with people who work at the companies that you are interested in working at and who have those um, job titles and roles, um, and follow them, write them a note, and just ask them for 20, 30 minutes of their time to talk about like, kind of like what I'm doing now. I'm talking to you guys about like, what I did in my career path. Um, and just ask for like some sort of 20, 30 minute talk chat. And you can learn so much from that. I did a bunch of those. I talked to people from Sony, Microsoft. I at whole point I had a whole Excel sheet of like who I spoke to. But it was a long range of people. Um, and that's something that really helped me just sort of understanding like what sort of skills, what like pathways to take when it comes to like, you know, becoming a UX researcher or anything. And It's actually how I land my first contract job, with Express Scripts, which is like a retail pharmacy company, online retail pharmacy company. So it's I think the network is important. Build a network, because even if you don't end up at the company that you want to, if you talk to people, they talk to other people and they say, hey, like this person's looking for this, or they're looking for an internship or something, and they can be able to connect you. So that's one thing that I will say, with LinkedIn. That is a very good tool to use. The next thing that I will say is, some companies do have internships as well for undergraduates and graduates. So I would even say like if you're unsure about being, you know, going to grad school, or being a professor, right, and having, a lab, all that stuff. If you're unsure about that, you could also supplement like those summer research opportunities with an internship, and that gives you some real world experience with like working at a company. And oftentimes, if you do well enough, they will offer you a job. um Julia, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, hi, Darwin.
Hi.
I was wondering, how would you search for these people on LinkedIn? For example, if I want a spot for a neuroscientist at, I don't know, Spotify, how would you search for people in that position or people around their area on LinkedIn?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So sometimes some jobs do have those sorts of titles, right? They'll like neuroscientist, or like, human factors engineer or whatever, right? Like, I think it's weird. Like I think sometimes you also have to like look at the skill set that you have. Um, so like if you are a neuroscientist, maybe you have some experience doing like EEG, right, or fMRI or something like that. Um, you could have a particular skill, and even like some job titles will have that, or some job descriptions will have those particular skills. So if you put those things into Google or LinkedIn, like they may pop up. The other thing is kind of like, as a neuroscientist, I think you have to think about like, what skills do you have? So I know a lot of folks that came from my program that ended up going the industry route, they ended up becoming data scientists because they had a lot of the work they were doing was computational. And so they were learning machine learning and, data science, all those things. So even though they're not doing neuroscience at the current job that they're at, they are leveraging their skills, right? Their other research skills, um, to do another job, right? And that's kind of what I'm doing, right? I am not um, studying vision science anymore at my job. But if an eye tracking study needs to be done, like I have the background and knowledge to do that, right? I have, a good hold on statistics, um, and like using stuff like Excel to make graphs and do analysis, or SPSS, R, right? So I think it's tricky because some jobs will have those sorts of like labeling, um, and some of them don't. So I think you have to, yeah, maybe it's gonna take talking to people at those companies to figure out like, hey, like this is my background, or like even a recruiter, right? Like this is my background. What sort of roles would you recommend for me to pursue? Um, and then some of it is like kind of just doing the legwork. But I think if any of you have particular questions about that, like I could probably help, right? If you shoot me like a message on LinkedIn, I can probably try to find like roles that are related to the skill sets that you have or want to have. So I think also just having someone that just knows is helpful. Yeah.
I appreciate that a lot. I was gonna ask like about that, instead going the other way around. Instead of like presenting my background and looking for something around it, I feel I'm a little ill prepared for the industry market. So I'd like to know, how would you build a skill set? Of course, it depends on the position you're looking for, but how do you recommend to build a skill set, and what skills did you need to come to the UX area?
Yeah, so if we're talking about UX research in particular, it's good to, most jobs in UX, we're mainly using surveys to do quantitative analysis. There's other things that we can do quant research on too, like telemetry. Telemetry is basically like, um, I guess it's kind of like they call it behavioral data. Like if you use something, it just kind of collects the activity of the things that you do, right? So right now I'm on a browser. I'm looking at my Gmail. If I like wrote an email and sent an email today, right? Like that's telemetry data. I would say like, oh, like Darwin sent out one email today, or like Darwin sent out like, you know 10 emails because it's Monday, and like Monday is like more busy, but like on Friday he sends out less emails or something like that, right? um so knowing how to do analysis on those things. But I think honestly, like even if you don't have the domain knowledge of like doing UX work, it's more so like the um the research skills, right? So just knowing, like, maybe just it's for some jobs it's just enough to have a statistical background, because like you're gonna get the additional training, and then with the statistics background you're gonna know how to do certain analysis and things of that sort. The other thing I recommend is doing projects. Like if you feel like you're like, hey, like, well, I want to be a UX researcher, but like I haven't ran a survey yet, right? Or I haven't done something like an interview or a usability study. These are all like sort of like qualitative methods, right? So like if I haven't done anything of these yet, like maybe it's good to like try to do a project on my own and then putting that as like something that I did. Um, so that like that also counts too, right? These sorts of side projects. And there's actually a lot of companies that will take interest in you if you're able to demonstrate like, yeah, I know about this because I've already did it. Um, Even like as an undergrad, if you're already in a lab and you're like, okay, like I'm interested in doing this particular thing, try to set up a project with your advisor that will showcase those skills, right? I know like one person who is a what did he study? Well, basically he whatever research he was doing, he was using like ethnography. And like that's also something that's like very relatable and useful in UX research. So it just goes down like it's like doing those case studies and doing those sorts of like projects are good, but if you could also if you're already doing something and you can leverage like, hey, like yeah, like I ran statistics or this or data analysis, right? Like that's also something you could put in your resume, and make it transferable, right? Like transferable skills. Um, so yeah, that's what I would say. Transferable skills and doing like mini projects to like get yourself up to speed.
Thank you.
Mhm. I think we are over time. Um, Yeah, I do have. I think I will have to go pretty soon, but I want to take maybe like one last question if we have, or if we don't have questions, I could wrap up.
I think Enzo has another question.
Sure.
He's sending in the chat, I think.
Oh yeah, let's take a look at that. Let's see.
How is your experience with eye tracker? He asked.
What's my experience with doing like eye tracking research,
Yeah.
basically? Um, I like eye tracking. It's fun. Eye trackers are weird because there are some that are very like more technical, and then there's some that are very like commercialized. So we have like ones that are just glasses and you just put them on, and you have like some sort of like battery or thing that's collecting data from like your eye movements from the glasses. And they're usually like more in the low fidelity range, like they don't collect as accurate data, but for some projects like it's enough. And then I've used eye trackers where they're not as portable. They're more like machines that like point towards your eye. And those are a lot accurate, but like the flaw is like they're not portable. And sometimes they take it takes like some time to figure out like how to get like clean data, how to make sure that the data is pipelining properly, and the sensitivity. Like I feel like for me, like the more high tech an eye tracker is, the more sensitive it is to like things like light or just weird stuff happening. So like that could be frustrating. Like I remember going through that in my graduate school days where I was like, like it just ran, some folks on a study. And I'm looking forward to the data, and it's like I don't see anything. Like where's all the movements? Like just like lost a whole bunch of data, because of like things not being calibrated right or whatever. But I think in general, I think eye tracking research is cool, and I would like to do more of that my day to day. Right now, I'm not doing that as much. Um, but yeah, eye tracking is cool. I think it's fun. It's just yeah, it has its limitations, like any method. Cool. Well, I hope this was helpful. And I hope I get invited to talk to you guys again next year or whenever. So